Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a live streaming webinar here on Facebook Live, facebook.com/open in Indiana. And today our topic is the basics of sales. And to present this topic, we have none other than Christian Tombers, IDSFA, owner and founder of Charlie Tango Productions. Christian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a nice, it's getting warmer. It is springtime. So, anyway, Christian, I have your presentation up on the screen. So please feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Um, Listeners of Open in Indiana, my name is Christian Tombers. I'm the founder and owner of Charlie Tango Productions. My website is thinksales101.com. And today the topic will be basics of sales. In other words, just a fire hose of information on the basics that people need to know about sales. Now, this is good for a novice. It's good for an expert as a refresher. It's good for those people who do not like to sell, also for those people who don't think they can sell. And I've been in sales now for about 40 years in different capacities, worked my way from sales rep, sales manager to sales trainer, and over those years developed some techniques that allowed me to get more sales than other people in my offices where they wanted me to train them. And that includes increasing my closing average, getting higher cash sales, and just performing in a much better way to increase my income. Next slide, please. Okay, still waiting for it on my computer here. There we go. Okay, just a little background on myself. I enjoy flying gliders. That's the picture in the top. And I also enjoy traveling. I enjoy riding segways. Any opportunity I get when I travel and there's a segway tour, I usually sign up for those because I've enjoyed doing that. And those are just some of my hobbies, and that's what my purpose of making money is, to be able to afford those hobbies. Next slide, please. This is a quote from Tom Hopkins, who in fact was my very first sales trainer back over 40 years ago. And his quote is, "Sales is the highest paid hard work and the lowest paid easy work there is. You have the freedom of expression, can be yourself, and do what you want to do. There are no income ceilings and no one limits your income but you." And then a quote from my friend Charlie Tango, "Your pay increase becomes effective when you do." Next slide, please. I know what I want to challenge everybody, whether you're at home, at your office, in your car, look around, find just one item where you are right now, where in its history, the history of the item that you're looking at, in its history to get here, a sale wasn't made. And I challenge you to find something, because just about everything and anything you can see or touch, some way in its history did have a sale involved. Next slide, please. And this is a quote from Thomas Watson Sr. He is the president of International Business Machines. And his quote is, "Nothing happens until someone sells something." And that's important to realize, that no matter what industry you're in, no matter what capacity you work in, somewhere, somehow, sales do happen. And that's something to keep in mind, because a lot of people think, I do a job, I work for a company where there are no sales involved. Well, just to get the job itself, you had to sell yourself. So there's a sale right there. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk just briefly about the psychology of sales. You are already a salesperson, even if you don't think so. Think about the last time you got someone to do something that you wanted them to do, and wasn't that a sale? Whether it be a business associate, a family member, a friend. You may have recommended a movie, you may have recommended a book. If they wind up watching the movie, if they wind up reading that book or buying that book, then that in itself was a sale. So we sell on a daily basis without even realizing or recognizing that is in fact what we are doing. And we'll get into actually what a sale is a little bit later. Next slide, please. Now, if you are a business owner or you work for a company, you do have more than just one customer. And the very first customer, of course, is the one that everybody knows about. It's the one who winds up using your product or service, your final product service user. And they must be sold on why they should invest in your product or service and not buy from competition. Your second customer are your employees. Your employees must be sold on why they should work for you and not for a competition. And then your suppliers. The suppliers must be sold on why they should do business with you. And if they're not sold on doing business with you because you don't pay your bills or you're not there when they deliver, then they may just take care of your competition instead of you. And then finally, your banks and lenders. The business banks and lenders must also be sold on why they should work with you. They must see that there's a benefit for them to do business with your business, and that'll get you some open doors later on when you need some help and there might be some financial difficulties. Let's go on to the next slide, please. This is a question you need to ask yourself. What is it that your customers really want? What is it that you're in the business to do? And sometimes it also requires you reframing exactly what it is that you do. I'll give you a quick example. I met a gentleman one time. He had started his own company offering services as an efficiency expert. And he worked with different companies, corporations, whether it be manufacturing or just regular business, in doing efficiency studies for them. And one time he overheard at a party his daughter, who was about 5 or 6 years old, being asked, "What does your daddy do?" And her response was, "My daddy helps other daddies get home to their families sooner." So if you look at that, it wasn't that he really was a quote-unquote efficiency expert. He was somebody that helped people be efficient enough that they can get their work done on time and spend more time with their family. So many times we need to take a look at what we do and see if there's another way to frame it that makes more sense. And when I often present that story about the efficiency expert, I get an awe from the audience. And that's the type of response you want to get on what it is that you do for a living. So take your title and see if you can't make it a little more emotional for your customers and clients. Next slide, please. Coming up is a quote from Henry Ford. Most people know who he is and have heard of him. And he said, "If I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse." So quite often consumers really don't know what they want or need. Now that doesn't mean that we create the need, like some trainers say we need to create the need. The need is probably already there. It's just that your customer is not aware that there is a solution to solve their need or to solve their problem. And that requires education and demonstration and passing on knowledge to the consumer. Next slide, please. This is a quote from Steve Jobs, and he said, "You can't just ask customers what they want and then try and give it to them. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new." So he is very innovative, or had been very innovative. Unfortunately, he passed away. He's founder of Apple Computers. And the idea here is that you need to have inventions, creations, and innovations within your own business that'll solve customers' problems. If you don't, then you may stagnate. There's a lot of business that went out of business because they did not follow the trends. They did not follow what people currently wanted. There are very few buggy whip manufacturers around right now. Companies like Blockbuster, Kodak, Sears, a lot of those companies either went out of business or hurting because they didn't see what the future held and how to stay in business, keeping up with the times. Next slide, please. Now, here's something to consider. You could have, in fact, the best marketing materials and the best product and the best service in the world, and it's all for nothing if you can't get your customer to buy. So having everything in place is all good and fine and good, but if you don't get the customer to buy, you're not going to make a profit. You're not going to sell your product. Next slide, please. On this slide here, there's a blank. It says, "Don't believe everything you," and then fill in the blank. And if you want to put your comment into the chat box, what your answer would be, that's fine. And since we do have a little bit of delay here, I'm not going to wait too long for answers to come. Most answers I get is don't believe everything you hear, don't believe everything you see. So the answer is don't believe everything you think, because that pretty much covers all the senses: hearing, seeing, touching, tasting. And that is where a lot of salespeople get into what I call prejudging. They think the customer doesn't have the money. They think the customer may not be right for the product. So there's very often, I've witnessed this personally, where salespeople make a prejudgment and wind up losing the sale. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Next slide, please. And this is a quote from a gentleman that we've all heard of, Abraham Lincoln. He says, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet." The internet is a very great tool for all of us to use. You can learn just about everything and anything nowadays on the internet compared to 20 years ago. You do have to be a bit careful, though, and make sure that what you're reading is accurate and true. We're going through some times right now where there's conflicting reports about health and what we should be doing. So same thing happens in a sales capacity. So be careful whose advice you take. I do not subscribe to the type of selling where you create the sale no matter what. I'll get into a little more detail on what my philosophy is in just a couple of minutes, but there's a lot of sales trainers out there that want to push and shove and twist the customer's arm until they get the sale, no matter what happens, and that's just not my style. I prefer a non-confrontational selling to where I'm not selling the customer, I'm getting them to want to buy. And go to the next slide, please. And this relates to an interesting study that was actually done about 40 years ago when I first got involved in this business. In fact, it was done by a home improvement contractor that sold replacement windows. And they wanted to know who their biggest competition was. And that way, if they knew that, they could train their salespeople how to sell against that competition. And what they did is they went through their files and looked up 100 homeowners who had received a quote from them a year earlier who had not bought from them, to find out whose product did they actually wind up buying, if not from their company. So upon researching all those prospective customers who did not buy from them, up to 80% bought from one and the same source. Next slide, please. And that source was Do Nothing at All. 100 homeowners who had not bought windows from this home improvement contractor a year earlier still had not bought windows. Whatever reason they had to search and get pricing on windows a year earlier still had not been resolved. So they still had whatever issues or problems they had that caused them to have a home improvement contractor come to their house for a quote. And as a result of this, both the sales managers and business owners decided, well, if we don't get the business on the first appointment that we have that customer, there's less than a 20% chance that anybody's going to get the business. And that's how the one call close got started. One call close is where the salesperson tells you that the deal is good for tonight only. And what will usually happen is a customer says, well, we don't like doing business that way. Let me show you the door, because we can't at least think about it till tomorrow morning. What's going to change between now and 8 hours from now when we wake up? The product and the price, there should still be the same. So I do, in my advanced training classes, go through how to get the customer to want to buy on your first appointment without them perceiving it as any kind of pressure. And then even go a second step. Even if a customer tells me at the door that they don't do business that way, no matter what my price is, no matter how good the product is, they're not buying from me tonight. Otherwise, you might as well leave right now. I still get an order 2.5, 3 hours later that does not cancel, and there's a technique that I teach on how to do that. And it's all non-confrontational, and it's all to the customer's benefit. Next slide, please. What I want to talk about next is the difference between marketing and sales. Some people think marketing and sales are both the same thing. There is a little bit of a difference there that I'd like to point out. Actually, a major difference. Next slide, please. Many of you may have seen this movie where the common phrase is, if you build it, they will come. Well, the problem with that is, next slide, please. This ties into the difference between marketing and sales. Some of you may have heard a phrase, that starts off like this: build a better mousetrap and the world will. And what is the rest of the phrase? Next slide, please. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. So I've got one problem with that phrase, and that is, next slide, please. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door only if they need and want a better mousetrap. Only if they know that you have that better trap. Only if they know how to find you and your door. And this is accomplished by marketing, promoting and advertising your business as to what you have, what kind of problems it solves, and how to find you. Whether it be a physical brick and mortar, be online, through personal visits, whatever it may be, that is marketing. Next slide, please. So in very simple terms, without getting all highfalutin with all kinds of big, long words, marketing is getting them to know about your product or service. And then what is selling? Very simply, selling is getting them to own your product or service. In other words, getting them to buy your product or service. Next slide, please. Here are some more details on what selling is. And it could be a combination of things, all of the above or one or two of the above. Selling is problem solving. People buy things to solve problems. Selling is getting someone happily involved with your product or service. A customer should be happy with handing over money to own your product or service. Selling is persuading someone to do what you want them to do, and that is to buy now. And that can be done without them perceiving that as being pressure, that they realize they need to buy now because it's in their best interest to do so. Selling is moving product from wholesale to retail to make a profit. That's pretty much how any brick and mortar business works. It comes in the back door wholesale, goes out the front door retail, and the difference is the profit. Selling is communication, educating the customer about what your product or service will do for them to cause them to want to buy from you. Selling is providing enough information that the prospect will want to own your product or service. And there's been many cases I personally experienced where somebody wanted to sell me something. I figured, yeah, it sounds pretty good, but I don't think I really need it. And they gave me more information and realized, yeah, actually, I do need that. Let's write it up. Here's my money. Next slide, please. Now, this is something I like to keep in mind when I'm selling. Selling is not something that you do to someone. Selling is something that you do for someone. So selling is a service. It's not pressure. It's not manipulation. It's not a technique. There's an ad going on in Indianapolis right now talking about a company that says we don't use any crazy sales techniques. Well, they do use sales techniques. They're just not crazy. So selling is something that you do for someone. Next slide, please. And then the question is, are you really selling? People don't like to be sold. People do like to buy things. If you don't like to buy things, you're one of the very rare people out there. So my philosophy and my advice is don't sell them. Next slide, please. What you want to do is you want to get them to want to buy. If they want to buy, you don't need to sell them. And how are they going to want to buy? If you give them enough information that you can show them that your product or service will solve a problem. And why would they want to buy from you? Next slide, please. And here's why people will buy things. People buy stuff to solve a problem. They want to avoid pain or gain pleasure, or a combination of both, avoiding pain and gaining pleasure. Think back to anything that you purchased, whether it was a small item or something large, whether it was recently or a long time ago. Did that purchase that you personally made help you solve a problem? Did it help you avoid some pain? Did it help you gain pleasure? Or maybe even a combination of both? That is pretty much what selling is all about, solving problems, helping people avoid pain, gain pleasure, or both. Next slide, please. Selling is the art of persuading, educating, convincing, enlightening the consumer that owning your product or service will greatly benefit him or her. Persuading doesn't mean pressuring. It means showing them enough reasons why they should own your product or service to their benefit. Educating the customer is giving them enough information about your product or service without overkill that their product or service, your product or service will help them avoid pain, gain pleasure, or solve a problem. You want to convince them through facts, through demonstrations, through information that this will solve the problem. You want to enlighten them, give them new ideas, new vision into things that they didn't know about. I bought many things that I had no idea even existed until I saw them, and then I figured, yeah, that's something really cool. I need to have that because it's going to solve a problem for me, whether it be avoiding pain, gaining pleasure, or both. And the consumer will buy the product if your product service benefits them. Next slide, please. A very common topic in sales training is FAB. F stands for features, A stands for advantages, B stands for benefits. A lot of sales trainers talk about features, advantages, benefits, and how that is what you need to present to your customer. Keep in mind, the features could be great, the advantages could be great, but the reason people actually buy a product or service is because of the benefits to them. So you need to focus your presentation on to the benefits. That doesn't mean you leave out the features or the advantages, but don't dwell on those. Get down to the true benefit. And next slide, please. It doesn't matter what product or service you're selling. You need to focus your selling efforts on communicating the benefits of your product or service to the consumer, not the features, not the advantages. I'll give you a quick example. Something as simple as a pen, like a ballpoint pen that has a clip on it. The clip on the ballpoint pen is a feature. The advantage of having that clip is that the pen can be clipped to a shirt pocket, can be clipped to a piece of paper so that it doesn't fall onto the floor. The benefit that it doesn't fall onto the floor, when you bend over, it doesn't fall out of your pocket. When you're moving papers around, it doesn't fall on the floor off the paper. The benefit is that they can save time not having to pick it up. They can save money by not having to replace the pen in case it fell into some water or some mud. It can save some health costs if you wind up banging your head on the table while you're trying to pick it up. So that's just a real simple example of how the benefit on something as simple as a pen can be applied to a sales situation. And I should do a workshop. We get into all those details and we can apply to your particular product or service. Next slide, please. Over my years in sales, I've boiled down to the actual reasons why people buy just about anything. These are the 7 ultimate reasons why most products or services are purchased. Next slide, please. The 7 benefits are save time, save money, health, comfort and convenience, safety and security, peace of mind, pride, and prestige. Most businesses can pick 1, 2, or maybe even 3 of these benefits and apply that to their product or service. What I challenge you to do is see if you can't add the rest of them so you can have all 7, and that'll make you stand out from everybody else who only picks 1 or 2. Did this one time. I was in a situation where there were about 8 business people. A seminar had been canceled. They didn't know it had been canceled. They still showed up. I was also there, so we did an impromptu seminar just on these 7 benefits. And one of the gentlemen was a diamond dealer from the Keystone of the Crossing Diamond area here in Indianapolis. And he immediately went to pride and prestige and thrust out his wrist to show he had a Rolex. because people want to show off their Rolex because of the pride of ownership. And after we got done with the little workshop, he added the other 6 to it. We figured out different ways to save time, money, health, comfort, convenience, safety, security, peace of mind would apply to purchasing diamonds. Some were a little far-fetched, but the result was he said, I'm going to change my literature and brochures because I can make myself stand out against everybody else who's only selling their products based on pride and prestige. And in the workshop that I do specifically just on this topic, we get into detail and examples on how that could apply to your specific product, service, and business. Next slide, please. Now, a question I get quite often is, how do I know that I'm actually getting down to the true benefit of my product or service? And I developed a very simple yet effective test to determine the true benefit of why they should buy from you and why they should buy your product. And that is called the So What test. Next slide, please. And you can apply the So What test to any product presentation that you do. To find customers most likely to buy from you, also look for those who are missing one of the 7 benefits. Because if they don't have the benefit of owning your product or service, those be potential customers. And then when you do your presentation, do the So What test. If after declaring what you feel is a benefit of your product or service, you can still ask so what, then you have not yet reached the true benefit. You may have only stated a feature or an advantage. So that is a little exercise that I challenge everybody to do on their own. Take a feature, advantage, and benefit of your product and see if you can get down to the true benefit of people owning that particular product or service. Next slide, please. Now, there's one thing that all selling has in common, and that is that your product, your service is purchased by people. And so far, people on planet Earth, could be local, could be national, could be worldwide. Keep in mind that purchases are made by people. They're usually not made by the computer. They're not made by apps or algorithms. Even the apps and algorithms have people behind them. A famous Madison Avenue advertising guru, his name is David Ogilvy, he once said, never forget the dogs don't buy the dog food. If you watch TV commercials about dog or cat food, you realize they make it seem tasty for us. But how many of us have actually opened up a can of dog food that says tuna flavor and tasted to make sure there really was tuna flavor and not chicken or beef or something else? So they do the advertising for people to buy the food for the dogs. So keep that in mind when you're selling your product, that it's people that buy your product or service. Next slide, please. Now, there are different types of sales, and again, I'm trying to keep this simple. We get into more detail in my actual workshops, whether it be the recorded workshops or the live workshops. There are different types of sales. B2B stands for business to business. B2C stands for business to consumer. And you're either selling in person, where they come to you or you go see them, or you're selling over the phone. They call you or you call them, or you're selling by mail or other media like the internet, online. And this is where you have to be careful because there's so much online selling going on right now to where everything's getting high tech and we're losing the high touch. There's a lot of word of mouth that is now replacing the word of mouth. And we still need to get back to the face-to-face selling. In fact, a lot of door-to-door salespeople that have gone to online selling are sometimes actually going out back to see their customers door to door and getting a ton of business because people like that personal contact. They like to know who they're handing their money to. So you want to ask yourself, has the internet allowed us to be more connected, or are we losing the face-to-face personal touch? Next slide, please. These are some of the steps in the sales process or the sales system. And on the right on the slide, you'll see where it says leads, and then prospect, and then customer, and that is typically referred to as a selling funnel. And the different steps in a sales system or process are prospecting, contacting the customer, qualification, not to be confused with prejudging, doing your presentation, handling objections, and then the close. And the reason why close is spelled with a Z is because I really don't want to get close if I spelled it with an S, and I also don't want to close, which is also spelled with an S, the box on the customer, because that creates an image of putting them in a box and slamming the lid on them. I want them to be open to buying from me. Next slide, please. This has a little bit more to do about the psychology of selling. Some people are just simply afraid of selling. They have a fear of selling. And the question is, what are you afraid of and what are your expectations when you get ready to make a sale? Are you afraid that they're not going to buy? There are statistics that show that certain industries, there are closing averages. In the home improvement industry, if somebody was selling 30 to 40% of the leads they were given or the appointments they ran, they're doing pretty good. So that means they didn't sell everybody. And if you have 10 appointments and come back with 3 sales, and that's the standard industry, then you shouldn't get too upset about the 7 who didn't buy from you. You had to go through those 7 to get to the 3. So it's just a mindset that you have to have. And next slide, please. And the mindset is such that not everybody's going to buy from you. You need to do enough presentations to present your product to enough customers out there that you can get your percentage of sales. In fact, years ago when I was involved with some door-to-door selling back in Michigan, selling steak and seafood door-to-door, I simply had the attitude, here's a neighborhood, it's got 100 houses, and I know that if I were to talk to everybody, I'm going to get at least 10 customers out of the 100, maybe even more, but I know I'll get at least 10, and that'd be a good day of selling. And the only problem was nobody had a sign in the front yard that said, we're the ones. So I had to knock on everybody's door and ask them. And what fear actually is, it's false evidence appearing real. What that means is to you, it appears real that the customer can't afford it. That may not be the reality. It may be that they think they don't need your product or service even though you think they need it. That may not be the reality. So there's this false evidence that appears real. And this can also happen in reverse. And you can go on to the next slide. It can happen in reverse. Customers can also have fear of salespeople. And we talk about this during some of our workshops and how to handle it. They may have been exposed to a sale off my notes here because my screen says live video interrupted. There we're back now. Sales closing rate is a number of sales divided by number of presentations. And the answer is how to increase your sales from 25% to 50%. And that is attitude. Your attitude determines your altitude. And of course, I had to throw in a little bonus there about my gliding. Next slide, please. Now, when you go into a sales situation, there can be a lot of different distractions, a lot of things that happen. And some of those you can control, some of those you can't control. And here's an example of some of the things that you may not have ability to control, the want or need. You might have thought that they're a good prospect, and it turns out they don't feel that they want or need the product or service. And you might even agree with it. There might be an issue with affordability. It might be an issue with timing. It's just not the right time to become your customer. Could be the weather is an issue. Could be that all the decision makers are not present. Could be delivery schedules, inventory, color choices, the economy, competition. So there are a lot of things that you can and cannot control. But there is one thing, next slide please, one common ingredient that is common with every sales call that you make, which you can control, and that is and the answer should be coming up on the slide, which next slide please. The one common ingredient to every sales call you make, which you can control, is you, your attitude, your demeanor, your knowledge, your background, your personality. That is what you can control no matter what all the other circumstances are. And if you stay cool, calm, and collected, even in a situation where the customer doesn't want to buy, you may still have left the door open for a future sale. I've even been in situations going back to the door-to-door meat sales. I had a customer who said, well, we're vegetarian. We don't eat any kind of meat. What about chicken and seafood? No, we don't eat that at all. We're totally vegan. Well, apologize to have interrupted you. Before I go, do you know anybody that does like good product quality steak, seafood, meat? And they said, oh yeah, my brother eats that stuff all the time. And my next question was, how do I get in touch with him? And he put me on the phone. My next appointment was the vegetarian vegan's brother, who bought several boxes of steak and seafood from me. So by staying cool, calm, collected, and just taking things as they come, you'll get more sales. Next slide, please. The next topic we're talking about, again, has to do with your sales attitude. Everybody has a favorite radio station, and that is WII-FM. Next slide, please. If you didn't know what WII-FM stood for, it stands for What's in It for Me. Any consumer that is ready to make a purchase is asking themselves that question, either out loud or just subconsciously in their own mind. Next slide, please. And this is what created a shift for me. I actually had an opportunity to meet Zig Ziglar, and the idea here is WIIFT will get you WIIFM. And here's the reason why. A salesperson, they're going into a sales situation with the mental attitude of what's in it for me? What's in it for me to get this customer to want to buy? And that's to pay your bills, to buy things that you want, to go flying, go on trips and traveling, ride segways like I do. And you need to shift your thinking. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about what's in it for them. And Zig's quote is, you can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. And when my attitude shifted from selling to helping, that's when my sales started going up. So you want to make sure that you're constantly thinking what's in it for them, because the customer is thinking what's in it for me. Next slide, please. Another thing I learned to do on all my appointments is I always told my customers right up front that it's okay to tell me no. And the reason why is customers, if they think they don't want to buy a product or service, they're starting to come up with all kinds of stories. I call them BS, which stands for buyer stories. And by telling them right up front that after I get done with my presentation, I quote them a price, if it doesn't work for them, they can simply tell me no. And I even add, I will accept your no as graciously as if you would have said yes. And that eliminates them telling me all kinds of stories. Now I can actually work with them. Next slide, please. Another way to look at the customer saying no to you is when I hear people say no, I look at it as them saying no because they don't know enough yet to buy from me now. So by giving them additional information, they might wind up saying yes. Here's an example. Imagine somebody's been on a deserted island for the last, say 50 plus years, and the person finally gets rescued. And somebody asks him, do you think it's possible for a guy to put his foot on the moon? And he'll say, no way possible, not at all. That's impossible. And so he's saying no to somebody putting his foot on the moon. By giving that person more information, education, videos, take them to Cape Canaveral, now we can give them additional information. So now he will say, yes, it is possible. So that is pretty much also what selling is all about for a customer who says no to your product. Maybe they just don't have enough information yet to see the benefit of owning it. Next slide, please. It is important as a salesperson to stay in touch with a customer. It doesn't matter if they bought or didn't buy, because even if they didn't buy, they may become your customer in the future. They may also have some referrals for you for other people that they know who might benefit from owning your product or service. And by doing so, by staying in touch with your customers through emails, through phone calls, through invitations, through even snail mail and newsletters, the one who shows up the most gets the business. And this is a situation that actually happened to me several years ago when I lived in a rental house. I needed to get the lawn cut, needed to get some yard work done. And I was looking through the internet, looking through all my coupons and flyers and advertising magazines as to who I might call. And while I'm doing that, the doorbell rings. And there's a kid out there with his lawnmower, and he says, you want to get your lawn cut? Guess who got the business? The kid showed up. So he's the one that got to do the work for me. And I didn't have to do any more research. So the one who shows up the most gets the business. Next slide, please. Very often I'm asked as a sales trainer, what are the three most common objections that salespeople will hear? There may be a few more, but these are the three most common, and maybe these also apply to your business. The first one is shop around. The second one is think it over. The third one is too much money. And when you hear a customer say too much money, it's important to ask the customer right away, do you mean too much for you or too much for the product? Too much for you would mean they like the product, they think it's a fair price, they just don't have it within their budget to become your customer. Too much for the product is where the customer has maybe 2, 3, 4 times the affordability. They got the money, they just don't think your product is worth it. So you want to ask that question so you're not going in the wrong direction. And when you're doing a sales presentation, you can actually avoid these three common objections if you do a masterful presentation. If your product and service presentation can answer all the above, then you're most likely to get a buyer and have very, very little objections. In fact, in one of my workshops, we talk about the fact that salespeople should welcome objections. Most salespeople learn how to handle objections, and I never look at it as an objection because that sounds kind of negative. It's like handling a hot potato. I look at an objection as a condition that the customer has that I have not yet satisfied. So instead of calling an objection, we can call it an unsatisfied condition of satisfaction. Next slide, please. So what I just gave you is kind of a fire hose of all kinds of information, a little bit from all the different workshops that I do. Once we get to go out back in public again, I'll be doing live workshops. I'm also going to be doing some recorded workshops. So you don't have to be limited to a time and place to learn the lessons that I offer. And I wish all of you health, wealth, success, happiness. This is just a smidgen of what I teach. Allowing me to present to you today also let me learn, because obviously teachers always have to be one step ahead of the students. Some of the additional workshops and additional content that you'll get from me, whether we do it in a workshop live or through recorded lessons or even a one-to-one, you'll learn how to get your customer to want to buy from you. You'll also gain immediately implementable skills to get more sales with even the same or less appointments. In other words, learn how to increase your closing average. You'll learn how to identify customers other salespeople would miss. Give you an example that, on that. When I was working selling replacement windows, I showed up at a customer's house one time, and the first thing the customer said after I knocked on the door was, "Congratulations." My response was, "Oh, thank you so much. For what?" And the customer said, "You're the third person to knock on our door, and you're the third person to come out to our house. You're the first one to come knock on our door. The other two guys pulled in our driveway, put their car in reverse and left. They did not even bother to introduce themselves." And then I turned to the for sale sign in the front yard and asked the customer, "Let me ask a question that the other guy should have asked. Why would you want to put new windows in a house that's up for sale? Or the realtor not have a chance to put the sold sticker on there yet?" And in my training workshop, I go through 4 examples where all 4 were for sale. 2 bought because it was going to help sell the house. The other 2 took the for sale sign down and through conversation realized it was better to stay put and put new windows in the house and fix it up and keep it as is. So those are some of the things that I discuss with many real live examples where customers were missed by the salesperson because of prejudging. I also talk about misconceptions about sales, identifying who is your customer. The conversation in your mind can make you deaf and make you blind. The importance of sales for the business owners, keeping your funnel full, the more details about the 7 benefits about why people buy, why you should welcome objection, the language of sales, what to say, what not to say, even how you should lay out your paperwork. And even another one that we talk about is why is it that the customer is always right, so that you don't have to feel bad about. Because I used to hear that so often. The customer's always right. Well, they're not right. They're wrong. Well, I learned how to overcome that to where it's not an objection. Really, it was just a psychological thing that I had to overcome. So we discussed that too. So I want to thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you all for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'm open to telephone conversations, a complimentary 30-minute consultation with some ideas and see if maybe we are matched to do business with each other. And all my paid-for workshops, classes, lessons come with a money back guarantee. It's a lifetime money back guarantee for as long as the two of us are on the planet. If you felt you didn't get your money's worth, just let me know and we'll take care of it. No hard feelings. I will ask a few questions because I'd like to learn from that and see what I was missing. So thank you, Ryan. That should conclude my presentation for today.
Awesome. Well, Christian, hold on with us for a second. For those of you watching live on Facebook here with us, this is the portion of the webinar where we ask Christian your questions. So if you are watching live with us here, please drop your questions into the comments, and over the next couple of minutes here, we will ask Christian your question, and you can get his answer live here as we're streaming. So make sure to drop your comment or drop your question into the comments now.
Yeah, and Ryan, so we don't have dead air while we're waiting for people to type, because I'm not the fastest typer in the world. Let me just share another story that happened to me on an appointment. I was observing a salesperson, and that salesperson was selling replacement windows. He presented the price to the customer, and the first response to the customer was, "Oh my gosh, that's a lot of money." Immediately, the salesperson came back with a memorized rebuttal for price objection, and the customer's response to the rebuttal was, "Huh?" And the whole thing came to a standstill. And I'm there just observing, so I'm not supposed to really interrupt. So I turned to the salesperson and say, "Do you mind if I ask the customer a quick question?" He said, "Yeah, go ahead." So I looked at the customer and pointed to the price on the table, and I said, Tom, I absolutely agree with you. That is a lot of money. How do you want to take care of it? Cash, check, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, combination of those? Which one of those works best for you? Customer sat up straight and smiled and said, "Oh, now I understand. Yeah, just put the whole thing on my Discover card. I'll just pay it off right now." So the conversation in the mind of the salesperson was that it was a money issue. And it never was. It was just simply a statement of fact. It's like the customer saying, "That's the floor, that's the ceiling, that's the wall, and that's a lot of money." It was simply a statement of fact, which the salesperson took as an objection. Any questions come up yet? Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan, for the opportunity to present what I do. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them by phone, by email. You can check out my website, thinksales101.com, or give me a call. It's 317-5-SALES-5.
Great. Christian, thank you so much for being our guest presenter today. And to all of our viewers, thank you for watching live. Make sure to catch the recorded version of today's webinar and other great webinars that we've done live on our website at www.openindiana.com/watch. Have a great afternoon, everybody.